Hey guys, Cooper Carter here again for G66. In our last video, I went through and showed you my 8 favorite factory presets in the Fractal Audio XFX 2. And I briefly mentioned and demonstrated on some of those presets how we could, with just a few tweaks, take it from a factory preset to a gig-ready patch using the scenes feature in the XFX. In this video, I'm going to take you from a completely blank grid to the full-featured performance-ready preset featured in the intro song. You're going to have access through scenes to all the different sounds in that intro song, including the lead, the rhythm, the affected sounds, and a couple more. So let's get started. Okay, so as you can see, we're starting with a completely blank grid in the XFX's AxEdit editor. And what I'm going to do to start out is run shunts all the way from here to this second to last block. And then I'm going to skip down to this third row and add shunts from the second block all the way to the end, which will route to the output. Now you might be saying, okay, there's not any sound, and you'd be correct because these aren't connected at the moment. I'm going to actually go in here and add this feedback send here, and we're going to turn this send level up to 100%. And then I'm going to add this feedback return here. We got to turn this mix up to 100%. And what this is doing is sending the signal down this chain to the send and down this to the output. And if we listen very closely, or you turn your speakers up, we can hear the guitar through here completely unaffected. It's just going to be the guitar direct with nothing going on. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is start adding some blocks. And to start off, I always want to do the amplifier and a cabinet. That's just the simplest way to build a preset without getting too fancy. Make sure you got a great tone with the amp and the cab, and then move on to everything else. So for the preset I'm going to be building, I'm going to be using the Wrecker amplifier, Wrecker 1 here, and you can see it loads with its defaults here. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and add a cabinet block as well, and we're going to do that at the very, very end of the chain, and you'll see why in a minute here, but we're going to add it right here and go in here, and the cabinet that I'm going to use is actually one of the Ultra Res cabs that comes preloaded into the XFX 2 XL, but I'm making this preset on an XFX 2 so that it can be compatible with both the 2 and the XL when I post it for you guys to see. So I've actually loaded that IR into my XFX 2, and those are included in the firmware file that you can download for your XFX 2 if it's not an XL, and you can just load them in using the cab manage feature. So I'm going to go ahead and select this TAF Mars 1x12 mix, which is the cab I used in the intro song, and we're going to start building the preset. Right off the bat, we can just hear what that sounds like. All right, so it's a pretty great sound already. I'm going to actually go ahead and boost this level way up to minus 1.5 and try that again. So now I'm going to start making some changes here just based off of what I know I like in the Wrecker. I'm going to boost up the bass. Also with the mids, I'm going to crank those up a tiny little bit. And then I'm going to take the treble way down. I like kind of a darker tone on the Wrecker, and so I'm going to take the treble down to about there and take the presence up just the tiniest little bit as well. And that's about all I'm going to touch except for this dynamic presence right here. I'm going to crank this down about 1 point there. So we can hear what that sounds like. And so now what I'm going to do is do the main thing that's adding this the character to the tone that you're going to hear in the introduction song, which is that I'm going to take this drive way down. I'm going to take it down to about 2.5, and it's going to give us a little bit of a cleaner tone, but still definitely not a tone anybody would say is clean. This is firmly in the kind of mid-gain territory, so especially with the pickups that I'm using, which are pretty hot DiMarzios, this is still going to be an aggressive tone when you're on your bridge pickup and really playing hard. So we got that kind of tone, and the way that I'm using this setting mainly, especially in the introduction song that I played, and how I would use this in a gig, is actually on the neck pickup, playing a little softer, and you get this nice kind of rhythm tone. Really, really touch sensitive, very dynamic tone out of this record amplifier. That's why it's one of my absolute favorite amplifier models to use, because based on how you're playing, you can either get a tone like this, or you can get a tone like this. So a very, very touch sensitive amplifier. All right, so now that we've got the amp and the cab, let's start adding some effects. I'm gonna go in here and add a drive pedal first. And the drive pedal that I really like to use with the record amplifier is the BB Pre here. Pretty nice, a really saturated, kind of smooth drive. But I'm going to change some of the settings here. I'm going to take the actual drive down to about 3, and I'm going to take this tone way down to about 1.5. And what that's going to do is just make it a little darker, not as sizzly on the top, but still maintain a little bit of the bite. We don't want to completely lower the tone because it's going to get too dark. And I'm also going to boost this level a little bit. So we're hitting the amp a little bit harder. Take it up to, say, 7. So we got this kind of tone off that. So it's a really nice saturated tone. It's a great sustain, a really round sounding lead, but we can again treat it very dynamically. So even with this much drive going into the amplifier, because the amp is set to a low drive level, you've still got a lot of touch sensitive response. So we can use the pick and get really aggressive sounding lead. Or we can use our fingers and get a really sensitive sounding lead. So again, a pretty touch-sensitive lead tone, and of course you can use your volume knob to bring gain in and out when you're playing. So let's keep adding some blocks here. I'm going to bypass this drive, and I'm going to add a tremolo block, which is kind of the main component of the tone that you heard in the intro song. And at its default, it's going to sound like this. Tremolo is one of my all-time favorite effects. Even when it's very pronounced in the effect, it's very subtle when compared to chorus or flanger or phaser or other modulation effects. It's much more natural sounding in my opinion, and it's just a really nice effect for rhythms and clean tones. So I'm going to start changing a couple of the parameters here. I'm going to actually bring this rate down closer to 4. And for the depth, I'm going to bring the depth down a little bit. 80 is a little pronounced. I'm going to bring it down to about 70. And let's give that a listen. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bypass that so we can get a sense of what the other blocks we add are doing. And at this point, I'm going to add a rotary block, which is another one of my all-time favorite effects. I see rotary as a more natural sounding chorus. I'm going to go ahead and make a couple changes to this. On the rate, I'm going to bring it up actually to about 8. It's going to give us a pretty intense effect, and it's going to sound a little something like this. And I used that on the second rhythm tone that comes in when the drums come in on the intro song. So with the rate on about 8, I'm actually going to go ahead and change rotor length. I'm going to change that to around 65, 70, somewhere in there. And that's going to change the sound to sound something like this. And I'll just bring this all the way up so you can hear what it sounds like when it's maxed out. And then all the way down so you can hear what it sounds like when it's on 0. So what that's doing by raising the level is just adding a little shimmer to it. So I'm going to put it back around 70 here. And with the mix, I'm going to keep that on 50. Some guys like to run it at 100, and I'll let you hear what that sounds like. It's a much more pronounced effect, so I'm going to leave it on 50, a little more subtle. And that's going to do it for the rotary block. I'm going to bypass that one. And now we're going to get into our time-based effects. I'm going to add a delay, and then also a multi-delay, which is one of my all-time favorite effects in the Axe-Fx 2. And then, of course, I'm going to add a reverb. Everybody loves reverb. Let's go in and bypass these so we can hear what they each do. On the delay, I'm going to go in and get the mono tape delay. Obviously, there's no actual tape here in the Axe-Fx, but it is simulated incredibly well. So I'll just give you a little sense of what we've got it set at default, which sounds like this. A couple repeats kind of fading away into the distance there. And on the mono tape, I am going to set the head time, which is the delay time, to 333 milliseconds. A little bit quicker there. On the feedback, I'm going to leave it at 20. I like that kind of repeating away into the distance, but the mix I'm going to take up to about 25%. So it's going to sound like this. A little more pronounced of an effect, and I'll do some actual playing there. I'm going to take this drive up a little bit. Just going to add a little more grit to the repeats. And I think that'll do it for our delay. So let's go into our multi-delay now. And on the multi-delay, there are a lot of different effects types, and I really encourage you guys to kind of play with these different ones. But the one I really like is Plex Detune. And just at its default settings, I'll let you hear what that sounds like. So multi-delay can be a really intense effect. You can use it to create big atmospheric pads, but I like to use it as kind of a reverb and a delay in one to make leads a little more atmospheric without muddying them up too much. So what I'm going to do on this one is go into the actual preset tempo here and change that to 137. And that's just a tempo that I've found sounds good with this delay. You guys are welcome to experiment. And the reason I do that is because, as you can see, the times here are actually all tempo locked. So there's going to be a quarter note repeat, an eighth note repeat, a dotted eighth repeat, and a dotted quarter note repeat. So you can hear kind of all those interacting if I just do a little chunk here. And that sounds a little weird when you just do it like that, but when you do a lead, I'll kick on this drive pedal real quick. You can kind of hear what it sounds like. Really nice kind of wide sound. So what I'm going to do with the multi-delay, I'm going to turn that drive pedal back off. I'm actually going to bring the mix here on the multi-delay down to about 13. I don't want the effect too pronounced, but I also want to be able to hear it, but it's going to be kind of more of an atmosphere type thing. And this decay time, I'm also going to bring down to about half of what it is. So it's on 5 seconds, bring it down somewhere around 2.5. And that'll make it sound a little more like this. If we do some chords, you can hear it adding just a little bit of atmosphere. So it almost, again, sounds like a reverb and a delay all at once with just one effect on. So I'm going to go ahead and bypass that and go over to this reverb. And with the reverb, I'm going to pick this medium room, which is the default setting for the reverb, and I'm actually going to change this mix to be a good bit higher than it is now. I'm just going to crank it up to about 35, somewhere in the 35-40 range. And this, with the tremolo, you'll hear actually constitutes the main intro tone in the intro song. So I'll just play the chords. So it's a big, expansive sounding reverb, but if we're not doing a hard kind of rhythm, which makes it very pronounced, and we're doing these kind of more flowing chords. The reverb is more atmosphere and less of an effect. So we've got the reverb set, and we've got all of the effects that I used in the introduction song. The one thing I want to do to make this a little more gig ready is for the guys who like using a cab on stage instead of a full range solution, like going straight into the PA like I do, we're going to just add a effects loop here. And what that's going to allow us to do is send out direct to the PA using output 1 through this cabinet block using our IR, and then also send out a non-cab simulated signal through the effects loop on output 2 to get all of this tone and the amplifier and everything else we turn on out and tap off before the cabinet block through output 2 here, and we can send that into a power amp and a guitar cabinet that's not full range. So if you guys have a 412 on stage or something, you can do that and also send out to the PA at the same time, or you can choose one or the other. This is just kind of the basic setup to have both available at any time. So let's start doing some scene work and make this a usable preset for a gig if you had scenes on your MFC, which is my preferred method of getting different tones out of one preset. So just right off the bat, let's make scene 1 just a dry amp, kind of a rhythm tone, just amp and cab, super simple. So that's a great rhythm tone. I'm going to make scene 2 the introduction tone in the song I played at the beginning of this video, which is the tremolo with the reverb. So that's going to be scene 2. And in scene 3, I'm going to make the second rhythm tone that comes in with the drums, which is the amplifier and the cab and the reverb with this rotary block turned on. For this tone, I'm using the middle position on my pickup selector, which on this guitar is a coil tapped pickup group. So for this sound, there's actually a little too much reverb. As I mentioned before, this reverb is set to where I like it for more flowing chords like this. But with this kind of rhythm part, the reverb's a little too pronounced. You have a couple different options here. You could add another reverb block, you could use XY states, or you could use scene controllers. I'm actually just going to add another reverb block here. And I want to keep the settings, so I'm just going to copy this and paste it right here. And then just take this mix down to about 10%. So now moving into scene 4, I'm going to recreate the lead tone. I'm going to bypass this reverb we're using in scene 3. And for the lead tone, I actually turned on all of these. I have a delay, a multi-delay, and a reverb. Sounds like it might be too much reverb, but remember that the multi-delay is set to a pretty low mix. So let's hear how that sounds. So if the effect sounds a little pronounced alone, remember that you're going to have other instruments swallowing up some of the reverb and delay tails. So those are the 3 tones that I use in the introduction song. This tremoloed rhythm, the rotary rhythm, and then this lead. But we have 4 other scenes left, so let's get a little creative. For scene 5, I'm going to make a tremoloed sound that has the same reverb and delay characteristics as the lead. So it'll make a really atmospheric tremoloed rhythm. So that's a pretty cool tone, and I would use that during maybe a bridge or something where I want the same rhythm tone that I've been playing on during the verses, but I wanted to open it up a little bit. So for scene 6, let's go ahead and make a lead that just has reverb on it. And I'm going to actually use this less pronounced reverb. So this is a little more in-your-face lead, a little drier sounding than with the reverb and the multi-delay on. It can also obviously be used as a more aggressive rhythm. So if we go back to this first rhythm with no reverb and no drive, you get this kind of tone. And we can kick this drive back on in scene 6 and add a little reverb. Obviously more aggressive. So let's go ahead and make scene 7 that same thing. And we've got a super dry, more overdriven rhythm tone. That is just really aggressive, and I would love to just sit here all day and just... Gotta love that. And for scene 8, what I'm going to do is go back to our rotary scene, copy this, and go back to scene 8. Say paste to current scene. And I'm going to make an atmospheric sounding rotary preset. So I'm going to turn on the reverb and delay that were characteristic of our lead tone, kind of a clone of the atmospheric tremolo sound, but with rotary instead of tremolo. All right, so that's 8 different scenes here. So let's go through them real quick. First, we've got our completely dry rhythm. Second, we've got our tremolo rhythm. And in this, you can see that because we added that reverb block, we need to bypass that. And in this one, we've got our rotary's rhythm. And here we've got our lead. And in scene 5, we've got our atmospheric tremolo. Scene 6 gives us either a dirtier rhythm with a little bit of reverb or a lead with less reverb and no delay. In scene 7, we've got the same tone but with absolutely no reverb. And in scene 8, we've got our rotary with all the atmosphere on. So there you have it, from blank grid to a gig-ready preset that includes all the tones I used in the introduction song, and also has plenty of room for you to add any effects you want. You can go in here and start adding choruses or flangers or whatever else you guys want. There are obviously a lot of effects in the Axe-Fx, and don't forget that just when you add a block, it doesn't mean that's the only thing you can do, because you can go in here to the effect type, and you've got all these different ones. And I'm going to go in and name this. We're going to call it G66 Video Preset 1, and hit enter. And now let's save that, and it's going to save over the blank spot I had in my Axe-Fx. And I'm going to export this and upload it to the AxeChange at axechange.fractalaudio.com under this name, so you guys can download it. But I encourage you guys to use the preset that you've built along with this video if you've been following along. Until next time, take care, rock out.